I see
I,
that it says live, but
You're
I,
it's,
live. Okay. I
I
think
just
I think it's
guessed.
working now. We're good?
but I don't
Folks.
see it streaming.
Okay. Welcome everybody. I apologize for those little moments of technical difficulty, but
It says
welcome
live, but
parents.
I was
Welcome
just
Okay.
everybody.
just
I think it's
guessed.
we are the Bright Family Engagement Team, and we are welcoming you all to our kickoff of our November month. And the topic for our November month is communicating around conflict, big feelings, and hot tempers. So just a reminder, the Bright Family Engagement Team offers a family engagement support program for the year. It's totally free. It's available for all parents of kids K through 12th grade, anywhere in the country. Our program kicks off in the first week of every month with an educational event like we're about to have tonight. And we're really, really excited to have Alice Barber with us, who you're going to hear about in a second. So the months always kick off with an educational event to kick off the month. And then we have 3 weeks of support groups that follow. These are free. We really want you to come. They're open to anybody. And the second week of the month is a support group for parents of elementary age kids. And that support group is again connecting to the theme of the month. So next week we will have our free support group, and you'll get the flyer in the YouTube live chat there. The flyer will have the link, and so that will be a support group for parents of elementary age kids around communicating around conflict. The third week of the month will be a support group for parents of middle and high school age kids, again around the same topic. And then the last week of the month is a BIPOC affinity support group, and that is also connected to the same theme of the month. So this month, again, communicating around conflict. These are free, virtual. Please come to our support groups. Bring your neighbors, bring your friends, bring your siblings, bring your spouses. It's just an opportunity to connect with other parents who are going through similar stuff. Parenting is a huge journey, and it really helps to be able to talk about what's showing up for us with each other. So I welcome you again. Bright is here. If you're a parent of a child in a Bright program, welcome to you. This is your family engagement team, and I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Lakeisha, who's going to introduce tonight and our fantastic speaker.
Thank you for that intro. So welcome again, parents and guardians, to tonight's presentation. We have a great guest speaker tonight. I'm going to start off by actually introducing her. And parents, please feel free to drop any questions that you might have in our chat. You guys will remain anonymous, and we will definitely get your questions, and and answer them as we go along. So with that said, I'm going to introduce Miss Alice Barber. She is a child therapist, registered art therapist, and holds degrees from Wellesley and Springfield colleges. She has been providing therapy to children in Western Massachusetts for over 25 years. Over that time, she has held roles in administration in local community mental health clinics. Currently, she works at a private practice in East Hampton as a consultant to elementary schools and as an adjunct professor at Springfield College. She specializes in the treatment of young children who have experienced trauma and is an author of Blue Butterfly Open: Moments from a Child Therapy Practice. Most importantly, she is a mom. So please welcome our guest speaker for tonight, Miss Alice Barber. Alice, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lakeisha. You did great. You were fabulous. Okay, so hi everybody. I'm going to be talking with you tonight, both as a child therapist who's been doing this for a long time, and also a mom. And I just want to acknowledge, and I'm going to be doing more of this when I share my PowerPoint with you, that being a parent, guardian, caretaker of children is one of the most challenging things that any of us ever do. And you know, we are met with these tiny beings who have their own personalities and their own temperaments and their own wants and needs. And suddenly we are sort of thrust into this role of understanding them, communicating with them, remembering what it was like to be a child, while also sort of just keeping them alive all day. And so we're going to be talking about just that, communicating with your kids, particularly around conflict, and how hopefully to make it a little bit easier. So I'm going to share my screen. And just a second here. Okay, so tonight I'm going to be speaking for about 30 minutes, and I would just ask one of the Bright members just to give me a heads up. I don't think I've ever spoken for only 30 minutes before. So I'm going to put a lot of information into these 30 minutes, and then we'll take any questions that you have. We're going to be talking a little bit about the brain, especially the brains of children, and about how different parts of the brain become boss sometimes, and when and how to intervene. We're going to learn a little bit about validation and how it can be helpful. And this is not only helpful in communication with kids, but it's helpful in communication with anybody that you might have conflict with in your life. And I want to really let you know that any questions about your kids, you as a parent or guardian, are totally okay to ask, even if you think you should already know the answers. I think we're living in a society where, you know, people put their sort of best face on Facebook and other social media, and it seems like everybody else has it all together when they're parenting, and really that's not true. So I want you to feel free to ask anything that's on your mind. How I want to start tonight is by just acknowledging that parenting is all sorts of things, right? There is joy in parenting, there is fear in parenting, there's all sorts of emotions that are attached to this role that we hold as parent or guardian to kids. And one of the hardest parts of parenting is when our child or teen or young adult child has really big feelings and big behavior that's attached to those big feelings. And so I want to acknowledge, I'll read a few of them on this list, that you as parents might be feeling, especially in times when your kids are having big feelings, especially when they're attached to big behaviors. And you might be feeling angry, enraged, exhausted, alone, lonely, like you're a failure. You might be grief-stricken. This is not the child that you thought you had. You yourself might be feeling out of control, unable to think, attacked. You might feel really smart if you are in a job, right, that you're really successful at, and you come home and you don't feel very smart because you don't know what to do with this person who's in front of you. You might be nervous, scared. There's a lot of terror in parenting, right? We all come to this wanting our kids to be okay. And when their big feelings are attached to big behavior, it can feel like we've done something wrong, or they may not be okay, which is one of the worst feelings to experience as a parent. There might be shame involved, embarrassment, resentment. I worked with a parent the other day who really felt like her life has been sort of taken away from her. Her pre-child life has been taken away, and there's a lot of resentment there. You might be at a place of feeling really apathetic, like I've tried everything, I just can't do anything anymore. I don't know what to do. And I just am here to say that any of these and more are completely understandable. We are not we don't become parents with a manual that says, okay, turn to page 4 if your child is having big feelings and big behaviors, right? It's not something we're taught in high school. This is not something that is talked about on a regular basis. And so it's really, you can feel as a parent like you're forging your own way. I have not met one single parent. I have worked with hundreds and hundreds, maybe 1,000 parents over this time, who looks forward to the times when their children have big behaviors and big feelings. It's a really, it's a really hard part of being a parent. And when this happens, the thing that most of us want to do in that time is to control our children, right? I am absolutely guilty of this. It is a natural feeling. And I also want to say that I am talking to you partly as a professional who can talk like this all day long and then go home to my own child, and that professional part of my brain disappears. It flies away. I don't know where it goes. And I am faced with my own child, and I look at her and say, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Right? And so the part, I always say there's a special parenting part of the brain that's a really primitive, hopefully loving part, but it's not always attached to the things that you've read about in books or the things that you've learned from other people. So here's the deal with this training. This training is going to be about your child, and it's also going to be about you, maybe even more than it is about your child, because you can't actually control your child. I put here, I don't know where everybody's from on this feed, but you can no more control your child's inner emotional life and how it's expressed than you can the New England weather. And what happens in moments of conflict is that we want to control even more. And I don't know about you, but I don't like being controlled. And it makes me more conflictual, not less conflictual. So we're going to talk a little bit about the brain, and then about ways that you can respond to your kids or your spouse or your boss that might help calm the situation. Okay, so we are starting with the brain. So the brain is not fully developed until a person reaches about the age of 26 or 27. So there may be people on this training tonight whose brains actually have not finished cooking. And I'll talk a little bit about sort of what happens first. When a brain starts developing, this part of the brain next to the number 1 is the first part to develop. Oops. And this is the brain stem, and it's right at the sort of the top part of the neck at the base of your skull. And this part of the brain, I'm just moving you all over here. This part of the brain is the most primitive part of the brain. And this is the part of the brain that has actually kept us alive as a species, because this part of the brain contains our physical reactions and our fight, flight, and freeze responses. So if there's danger in our environment, that part of the brain goes into action. All right. If we didn't have this part of the brain, we would no longer exist. All right. This is the part of the brain that if I'm driving on a highway and somebody cuts me off, I don't stop to think. I just slam on my brakes, right? My thinking at that point is asleep, and this part of the brain is keeping me alive with a reflex that happens instantly. The next part of the brain to develop is the midbrain. So this is a place of high emotion. All right. So when your child is in the brainstem place, your child is in a place of high physical intensity. When your child is in the midbrain place, your child is in a place of high emotions. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about this, but the midbrain place is a place of yelling, swearing, screaming. All right. My guess is that many of you have experience with the midbrain and your child. Okay. The last part of the brain to develop, and again, this part of the brain doesn't develop completely until somebody is in their mid to later 20s. So it takes a long time to develop. This part of the brain is the place of learning and logic. This is the part of the brain that you can have a conversation with your child about maybe why they're doing what they're doing. Okay, so we have a very physical part of the brain, we have a really emotional part of the brain, and then we have a thinking part of the brain. When your child is throwing things, hitting you, they are here. What that means is that they are in their very primitive, almost, I call it the cave person part of the brain. All right. They are not hearing you. They are completely enveloped by their bodies and their need to defend themselves. This part of the brain, when they are yelling and screaming, what they need is connection with you. Only after, I'm going to back up a couple of steps. So when they're in their primitive brain and they're physical with you, they need a physical intervention from you. All right. So when they are hitting, kicking, they're going to need, and we're going to talk about interventions, they need a physical intervention from you, which might be moving away from them. It might be moving close to them. It might be giving them something physical to do. When they're in their midbrain, they need connection with you. They need to understand that you understand what it means to be them in this situation. And only when they get these two things can they move up to a place where they're talking to you about what's going on. So what I see a lot of adults, parents, guardians doing is when a child is in a space of hitting, kicking, spitting, or screaming, yelling, whatever it is they're doing here, parents and guardians say to them, look me in the eye and let's talk about what it is that's going on right now. This is one of the biggest mistakes that we make as adults, is that we are expecting children who are here and here to have rational conversations with us. But what happens when a child or an adult is here or here is this part of the brain actually goes to sleep. We can't access this part of the brain anymore. Okay? So again, your child is being physically aggressive means that they're here in their brainstem. They aren't actually hearing the words that you say to them. Okay, so you can be saying to them, please calm down. You can go over here and sit down. They're not actually hearing what you're saying. Interventions like this, when kids are at this stage, it's like a roller coaster that has gone over the top and is sliding down the side. You can't stop them. A lot of this stage is about waiting it out. They're already going downhill. And so your job as a parent is to help keep them safe. Trying to get them to look you in the eye and or talk about the situation is going to likely make things worse. And what's most important at this stage is actually your own breathing and control of your own body as a parent. And that what that is called co-regulation. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. If your child is showing high emotions and they're in this part of the brain, the midbrain, they can take in a few more words, and what they need at this stage is to be understood and validated. You don't need to agree with them to validate them, but validating means that you understand and put yourself in their shoes as best as possible, and that their feelings make sense given the situation. If you are invalidated, you and me and your kids will probably continue to escalate. Invalidated can look like if I'm coming in and saying to my friend, I've had a really bad day, and my friend says, oh, Alice, it probably wasn't that bad. You'll be okay. They're not actually hearing what I was telling them. Right? We do this to kids all the time. I do it to my own child. My child came home, had a bad grade on a test, and I said, oh, it's okay. It'll be fine. Everything will work out, right? If I were validating my child, I would have said, it's really hard to get this kind of grade on a test. What is it that we can do to help you feel a little bit better, study differently the next time? When you validate, you're letting your child know that their feelings make sense and are understandable to you in the situation. When your child is experiencing these big emotions, you're going to need to be mindful of your nonverbal communication. Are you rolling your eyes? Clenching your fists? Are you breathing? So your child is going to know whether you're believing them and understanding that they're in some sort of pain through your nonverbal communication. You don't have to agree with them. I didn't actually agree with my child that the grade was that big of a deal, but I can understand where she was coming from. One of the easiest ways to validate is to repeat back to your child what they've told you or what your understanding is. So I could have said to my child, you're really upset that you got a bad grade on that test. You can guess at feelings at this stage. So if this stage is about keeping them protected and keeping them safe, while this stage of physical aggression passes, this stage is about maybe guessing what the feeling might be. You're going to put yourself in their shoes as best as possible. Only when your child has calmed can you engage around logic and reason. And I want to say a little bit about this part of the brain, which doesn't finish developing for a long time. And that is very young children. Their ability to engage in logic and reason takes a long time to develop. So if we're talking about preschoolers, kindergartners, first grade, second grade, this isn't their greatest strength, logic and reason. So much of the time, this is a high task, though we expect it a lot as parents of young children. And what we're expecting from them is actually beyond their capacity, which makes them even angrier, right? So when I do therapy with children of all ages, I want you to know that change is super slow, and it's slower than I like, and it's slower than the parents and guardians like. It's hard to be patient with change. And often when you're actually in it, you can't see the changes as they're beginning. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about co-regulation. So one of the most important things that you can do when you're in conflict with somebody else is something called co-regulation. And what that is your own management of your emotions when your child or spouse or boss is having a moment of dysregulation. So this is about you keeping your body calm so that the other person can borrow your calm. So something that's really interesting is that if I were having a conflict with somebody, my nervous system, my brain is talking to their nervous system. And so if I start to escalate, they're going to start to escalate, and vice versa, right? I have to work really hard to keep myself calm at this time. When words don't work and can't be heard, eye contact can be hard. And so I recommend not asking your child to look you in the eye when they're in this dysregulated space, because that can further escalate somebody. I would ask you to think about what helped them regulate when they were a baby. We don't actually change that much from when we were very, very young. So if you have a child who appreciated swaddling, so I was told I really liked swaddling, my sister not so much, and I still like virtually swaddling, right? I like heavy blankets around me, right? And so really thinking about, even if you have a teenager, thinking about what helped soothe them when they were a baby probably still helps soothe them to this day. I want you to think about intervening, especially when they are in this space, in the physical space, or in the high emotional space, with using the 5 senses. So when a person is dysregulated, it's a full body event. And so you want to access all parts of their bodies. And so if there is a lavender bath to be had, if there is a smell that they like, if there is something that they like to hold, that can go directly to these places. There's a skill called TIP, which if you are in a big physical distress down here, so if your child is hitting, kicking, spitting, or if you are headed in that direction, there's a skill I'd like to teach you called TIP. And TIP stands for, the T stands for temperature. There are lots of nerve endings here around your eyes. A cold washcloth or one of those flexible ice packs over your eyes or held in your hand can help regulate you. Intensive exercise is the I in TIP. And I don't mean you have to go run a marathon, right? It can be 10 jumping jacks. It can be running up and down a flight of stairs. It can be push-ups against the wall. It can be sit-ups. Paced breathing is breathing all the way down to your belly and all the way back again, and usually in through your nose and out through your mouth. I've heard recently that it's even more effective if you take a sharp inhale through your nose, like, and then a slow exhale, and progressive muscle relaxation. So these are all in the body, right? This is not having conversations with your kids. This is calming the central nervous system. Progressive muscle relaxation is taking different muscle groups in your body and squeezing them. So typically, if I'm teaching a young child, I just do fists. And so we squeeze our fists and breathe in through our nose and out through our mouth and release our hands. And again, In through our nose, out through our mouth, and release our hands. And you can actually do this with all the muscle groups in your body, not just your hands. The final sort of intervention that I want to talk about that folks don't often think about is about the fact that any emotional event is temporary. Any emotional event is temporary. The hard thing about emotional events is that when you're in them, they feel like they're going to last forever. So it's sort of like a trick your brain plays on you at that time. And the skill here is to ride that wave. It's like a wave, right? That goes up and then comes back down, right? And you might feel angry shortly thereafter, but the actual event of the big emotion does not last forever, right? And so it's about how getting from the beginning of the wave to when it levels out and goes to the sand, right? And that's called surfing the wave of your emotion. All right. So, I'd like you to try this, if you would. And this is sort of like a tip skill. All right. This is relaxation in under a minute. And again, this is more for you than it is for your child. So you can validate your child, and that's going to help diffuse the situation. But really, this is about you maintaining your cool. There are studies that studied teachers and kindergartners, and they studied the rate of breath of the teachers and found that if the teacher's rate of breath went up, so did the rates of the kids in their classes, right? So give this a try. Scrunch up your face and release. Raise your eyebrows a few times and release. Drop your jaw. Roll your shoulders. Shake out your hands. Take 2 deep breaths and repeat as needed. So I want you to notice that most of these interventions are actually physical. I'm not asking you to have long conversations about the conflict with your kids. You're going to get stuck in there, and the wave is going to go on and on and on and on and on. And it's not until you've relaxed your body and let your child know that you understand why they might be upset that things are going to diffuse. There may be a question about where the line is, right? When do periods of dysregulation go from being typical development to more of an issue of concern? Kids, toddlers and teens in particular, have moments of dysregulation, of high emotion, high conflict, and that's really, really normal. I'm not saying it's pleasant, but it's normal. And the question is, where's the line, right? And my answer is this: are the instances of dysregulation, are they preventing your child from being who they want to be? Are they causing safety issues for them and others around them? Are they preventing them from learning, growing, making friends, taking care of themselves, and sleeping and eating? And if you can say yes to any of those things, that's a time to seek extra help, right? In the form of a family engagement meeting, in the form of a therapist. If kids are able to move fairly quickly through periods of dysregulation, that's completely normal development, right? If safety becomes an issue, or if these periods of dysregulation are causing them to not make friends, to not do what they want to be able to do, those are red flags for me. All right. I am happy to take questions.
That was awesome, Alice. Thank you so much.
Hi, I have a question from one of the people watching, and so I'll go ahead and start with that.
Sure.
And the question is, how hard do I push my child to apologize after they hurt someone physically or emotionally?
That's a great question. So I'm not a huge fan, actually, of apologies that are forced, because I can tell when they're forced, right? So I encourage kids to apologize, but I tend not to force them to apologize. And oftentimes as parents, we want to make our kids apologize nearly immediately after the event. And if you can remember, right? So if I had an event where I was in my brainstem, that means I was my most animalistic person, right? It takes a while to come down from that, right? And so if I'm here, I'm not in the place where it's going to make sense for me, where an apology even makes sense. So oftentimes with kids, what I see happening is we don't give them a lot of time. Kids need a lot of time to process things. They don't process things as quickly as adults do. So if I do something, I may be able to apologize immediately, but it's because my brain has been developed for many years, right? And so I would say I prefer when the apology is genuine, and you are allowed to give time between the event and the apology. And I would encourage that, because somebody needs to, when you're at the top of the wave, coming up with an apology doesn't mean anything. You're not thinking about the consequences of what you did, which is hard for young kids anyway. So my suggestion really would be give more time for the apology than you think you would typically.
Wow, thank you. I wish you would have been around when my kids were younger. Okay. So I have a long list of questions, so I'm trying to triage here. But the first one, I think this is a really important one, is what should I do if I lose my cool with my kid and I regret it?
Apologize. I think, I don't know why a lot of us feel like we can't apologize to kids. But kids appreciate it, right? And if we are the folks also saying to kids, you need to apologize because you just did this thing, and then we aren't modeling that behavior, then how are we expecting it from them, right? And so kids appreciate apology. They also appreciate if they have asked you a question that that you don't know the answer to, that you just say you don't know the answer to, and you're going to ask some people and try to figure it out and come back later. So in both cases, you're treating them with the respect that you would want to be treated with.
I really appreciate that, Alice. It's really it's like showing an example of what it looks like to apologize to, and also showing that example that we can all sometimes lose our cool, or we can sometimes go to that place, and doesn't mean we're, horrible people. So
I mean, I think there's a lot of adults who feel like they can't show emotion around kids, and there's absolutely a line. Like, I don't want kids to be harmed, and I don't want kids to feel like they need to take care of us. That's also problematic, right? But they also need to know that we are feeling human beings who can mess up sometimes. And I work with a number of kids who have parents who are really successful at whatever it is they're doing, right? And kids, professionally or socially or whatever, and a lot of those kids feel like they never see their parents make mistakes. And it becomes a problem for these kids, many of whom struggle with perfectionism, right? And so it's really important for kids to see their parents have a wide range of emotion and be able to ride the wave and do something and step away or do something that helps diffuse their anger or their scare, their fear, their whatever, right? Kids copy us. That's what they do. And so if they never see us dealing with emotions, if they never see us loving other people, if they never see us disliking other people and managing our dislike, they're not going to know how.
Wow, fantastic. Okay, so how how do you know what limits to set with your kids when you're communicating around conflict?
How do you know what limits to set when you're communicating around conflict?
And maybe yeah.
So, well, the number one limit is no violence, right? And so, the other thing is that kids also need to see grown-ups have conflict with one another, right? So a lot of times I have parents that come in and they say, well, we have never argued in front of the kids, right? I don't know how people do that, but they've never argued in front of the kids. And so kids have never actually seen the beginning, middle, and end of an argument, right? So in terms of limits, I mean, what becomes challenging is that it depends on the level of conflict. It's hard to set limits if what you are trying to achieve is safety for your child, right? It's hard to say, well, you can't say those words to me, or you can't do that, because if a child is back here, they need you just to contain the environment in that moment, right? And I think a lot of us say and do things in conflict that are beyond the limits we would set when we aren't in conflict, right? So there's a lot of forgiveness that has to happen, right? Following conflict, there's a lot of understanding that in the heat of the moment, it may not actually be personal. It may be the result of just feeling really, really hot, right? And your child may say horrible things to you, and letting some of that sort of roll off your shoulders is really challenging and could be really important in the moment, right? You've been working so hard to provide for them and to feed them and to clothe them and to house them, and then they tell you that you're an awful person, right? And so a lot of this is about our own regulation at the time, right? I hear you. I hear that you don't like what I'm doing right now, and I have to do it, right?
Yeah, and that kind of like touches on a question that we had around, like, how do you not take it so personally when you're during a conflict, when your kid is maybe saying horrible things to you? Like, how do you manage that?
Mm-hmm. So it's really hard to do as a parent. It's much easier for me to do when I have clients who are saying things to me, right? And so I'm not going to tell you that by me just saying don't take it personally is not, you're going to take it personally. If there is a time that you can step back and say, this is about my child's anger, this is about my child's feelings, this is about my child who doesn't actually have access necessarily to the words that I might have access to express themselves. So they call me stupid, or they call me worse than stupid, right? And that's what they have access to. That's what those are the words that come to mind, right? When they're in these states. And so what we hope is that later, as their brain develops, they're going to have more of a capacity to actually like engage in conflict that's not sort of just attacking, right? But you know, if there was some magic way of not taking it personally, I would tell you, I would be on a book tour right now, right? Like I would be, you know, it's hard. It's hard. You know, what's said a lot is that, you know, our kids, if they feel really secure with us, they're going to let us have it, right? And so if there's a way of reminding yourself of that, even post-conflict, in the middle of conflict, your nervous system is going to be up here, so you're going to be taking everything more personally anyway, right? So it's hard for me to come in and say, well, just don't take it personally. You're going to take it personally.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge challenge, I know.
Mhm.
Well, what about, and I'm sure you've seen this or experienced this, is when two parents have different values around, you know, conflict, and they don't agree on how to handle it. I mean, what do you suggest with that?
So I think I'm not a person who thinks that two parents need to be exactly the same person or have the same beliefs. Like, it's not realistic, right? I do try to help parents connect with what it feels like to be a child and to have two separate expectations from the two people they love the most in the world about how overwhelming that can be. And so where parents can meet more in the middle, I try to help get them there, right? It's a big challenge. And sometimes what ends up happening is that the child takes the side of one parent or the other, right? And so there's this kind of dynamic that becomes really, really hard in the family. And it's really about reconnecting, which is hard for adults to do, reconnecting what it feels like to have these two people saying very, very different things, right? And helping parents connect to what they think maybe the child needs to hear in the moment, which might be different from both of what their beliefs are, right? It's a challenge for sure.
Yeah, and I wonder too, like, just kind of adding on to that around discipline, if one parent believes that, you know, that behavior, you know, maybe being in their brainstem is a choice or whatever, and they want to discipline around that. Have you had to have some conversations with parents around that when they have differing belief systems around that?
Sure. You know, and I think this is generational, it's cultural, I think it's generational. I think folks who aren't engaged in these kinds of conversation, it can feel like when a child is in a brainstem state that they're doing this to us, right? That they have decided to really, really make us mad, and so therefore need to be punished in a pretty harsh way. A lot of times those sorts of punishments are also coming from our dysregulated place, right? So if there's a consequence to be had, I would also recommend pausing before you make the consequence, right? So that it doesn't come out of our own dysregulated place, right? I often say to parents, if they are punishing hard for those brainstem states, I ask if it's working. And 9 times out of 10, they tell me that it's not working, right? And so then we go back and we try to figure out other ways of intervening with the child. that doesn't involve harsh punishment. I also have lately been asking parents, if they were in that state, how would they want to be treated? Right? And so if I am having an awful day at work, right? Or, I was in traffic and then I didn't do well at something or whatever. What kind of compassion would I want as a human being? Right? If I, and I'm not saying that punishment sometimes isn't warranted and that I wouldn't need a punishment for doing something that was really, really wrong. But a lot of times our kids aren't doing these things intentionally. They are doing them because their bodies have experienced a huge emotion and they don't know what to do with it. And big emotions in kids can feel really scary to them. And if something feels really scary to them, they move to this fight or flight place in their brain and they try to protect themselves, right? They do something that's probably pretty physical, sometimes with a smile on their face, which really angers people, right? That kid was smiling. They knew exactly what they were doing. Did they? I don't, most kids know.
Yeah. Well, and of course I work in a middle school, so I see some very big emotions going on. And I think a lot of the adults I'm around sometimes assume that all these emotions are intentional and that they're acting. And so they want to see consequences for behaviors. And so that's really challenging, because I feel like I'm the other parent.
Yeah, it's challenging, especially when there's an absence of teaching what to do with big emotions, right? And so I'm not somebody who thinks there never needs to be a consequence. However, if we have a middle school and we have kids who, I have a middle schooler at home, who are feeling these huge feelings and puberty has hit, and there are some kids who are really immature and some kids who are mature, and they're all mixed together, and they're being asked to sit still for most of the day, which their bodies can't physiologically actually do, right? And study things that they don't want to be studying, and then are not taught how to manage their emotions and their bodies. And so then they explode. We can begin to understand how they got there, right? And we can consequence them, but it's probably not going to change much if we aren't also teaching them what to do with themselves when they have a big emotion that's combined with the onset of puberty, that's combined with all these other things, standardized testing and all of these things, right? So, I think consequence is fair some of the time, and sometimes it's not. And sometimes we're consequencing kids for behavior that's actually age developmentally appropriate.
Absolutely. We're on the same page. I believe coping skills are really important, that we should be teaching those as part of education, how to be in your body.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, what if you have a kid at home that there's a topic that, that's been it's a conflict point, and it is, and how do you avoid walking on eggshells around that, or how do you bring that up? Obviously I know they need to be regulated. They can't, obviously we don't be in our brainstem, but it's something that you really do need to touch base on and talk about, but you feel like you're walking on eggshells. How do you deal with that?
So most of these questions could also be answered by it depends on the kid, right? And I think you can be honest with the child and say, it feels like I'm walking on eggshells here. How are we going to have this conversation? It's okay to have conversations about how you're going to have conversations. That's okay. If it is about safety of the child, it is okay to lay down the law, the rule of law, and whatever sort of comes is what comes, right? But I think kids are much more capable than we give them credit for. And we can ask and say, we need to have a conversation about this thing. And we're not having the conversation right now. But we need to have a conversation about this thing. What are your ideas about having the conversation? Most kids, most age will give you ideas. So I often say that most of the interventions that I've done with kids in my child therapy practice, the most brilliant ones have actually come from the kids themselves. People say, Alice, that was amazing. And I say, that wasn't me. That wasn't me. I asked the child what they thought they should do, or the way that we should handle this. And they actually have ideas. We as parents don't have to know it all. We think we do. And I don't know where exactly that came from. We think we're supposed to have the answers for our children, and we don't. And so then we try, we scramble, we try to figure things out, right? But engaging the child in conversation with us about how something might go or not go is totally okay.
Well, and just to end on that note, like what you just said, I know for me as a parent, all along thought I had to have all the answers because I thought my parents had all the answers, but it turns out they didn't either. Different generation though, they didn't give anything on. My kids know I don't have all the answers. I just want to thank you, Alice, for this presentation. Number one, just the information on the brain, like that kids need to be regulated before we can even, and then connect before we can even get to any form of, reasoning. And even though we'd like to get to the reasoning, I know for me, I always want to jump to the reasoning, like, what's going on here? We can't do that right off the bat. And I think that's the really number one thing we need to remember. And it may not even happen around it. And depending on the kid's age, I think I'm reverting is really, I'm going backwards anyway. Sometimes my kids are like, mom, settle down, and then just the idea of validation. I just think about what I need as a human. And when I talk about something that's really hard and someone doesn't say to me, oh, it'll be fine, it's going to be okay. When people do that to you, it doesn't feel genuine, and it feels like you're being put off, like I'm taking your time and you really don't want to be here with me in this moment. And
we do this to kids all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And why do we do that to kids? I mean, that's the big question is, we need to treat kids like humans, just like we would treat our friends or our partners.
Well, and I know we have to end, but I think we do it to kids because it's scary to sit with kids when they have big emotions. It's
Absolutely.
Scary. And especially when it's your own child, right? It's scary to think that your child may be in terror or maybe depressed or maybe suffering, and if you say everything will be fine, then we've put the conversation over here. If you say, I know that you're hurting, then the conversation is right in front of you, right? And that can be terrifying.
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely terrifying. And my heart goes out to families raising kids. I mean, I thought when my kids moved out that things would get easier, but I'm even more terrified sometimes, like you worry. But I just really appreciate this conversation. I think it's a meaningful one that all of us parents, but everyone needs to hear. We need to be doing this with our friends, with our colleagues, having grace with our colleagues who may seem like they're cranky or mean sometimes. There's something going on, having some validation is really huge. And I do want to remind everyone, so thank you, Alice. This has been so helpful. We really appreciate this. And I'm going to share this with my families for sure. And then just as a final reminder, next Tuesday, we will be having parents supporting parents meetings, and those will be held at 7 p.m. And so that information should be sent out, and it'll be elementary based groups. The following Tuesday will be a middle school and high school age groups for parents supporting parents. And then finally, our next Tuesday beyond that will be a BIPOC affinity group. So you can, there's a link to sign up and join immediately. And we would love to see you there and support you and have these conversations. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. Come join us on the support groups. Thanks, everyone.